Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and it's time we talk about Australia again. But first, I'm sure you're wondering, is this a green screen? No, we are in Hartford, Connecticut at the old Whalers Stadium, and it's empty, so we thought it'd be a pretty cool place to do a story. Anyway, let's get to the actual news, because there's huge news out of Australia. It's something that is going to make a lot of the world stop and take notice, because this is something that is quite historic on the scale of this current financial crisis that we are entering into. Australia cutting interest rates. And as this article out of news.com.au says, Australians should expect another rate cut by the end of the year, RBA warns. And as the article goes into, the central bank boss has warned of further cuts by the end of the year. As the Treasurer admits, the Australian economy faces, and I quote, challenges. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe slashed the official cash rate on Tuesday to a fresh historic low of 1.25%, but said in a speech last night it would be reduced further to help stimulate employment growth and inflation targets. And I quote, are interest rates going to be reduced further? The answer here is that the board has not yet made a decision, but it is not unreasonable to expect a lower cash rate, he said. Our latest set of forecasts were prepared on the assumption that the cash rate would follow the path implied by market pricing, which was for the cash rate to be around 1% by the end of the year. There are, of course, a range of other possible scenarios, and much will depend on how the evidence evolves, especially on labor markets. Despite the likelihood Australians can expect their lower rate in history to tumble further, Dr. Lowe says it isn't in reaction to a deterioration in our economic outlook. And as he says, it is possible that the current policy settings will be enough, that we just need to be patient, the RBA boss said. But it is also possible that the current policy settings will leave us short. Given this, the possibility of lower interest rates remains on the table. Now let's talk about this a little bit, John, because I think this is really significant, especially since we see all these countries, we see the interest rates pushed up, and we've talked about this before. It's a desperation move because they know what's happening, they know what's coming, and they want to stay out of negative interest rate territory. But when we start to see them start to drop out interest rates, we're seeing the beginning. Yeah, we're seeing the beginning of a domino effect. Can you go into the importance of this?
Yeah, no, the importance of this is that they're actually, first of all, Australia hasn't been increasing interest rates at all. Mm-hmm. If you look at the chart here, Josh, that I'm going to show you, it shows that they constantly been dropping it down ever since 1990, which was at 17-something%. And one other thing that Australia has also done lately is selling their gold. They still had a lot more gold in Canada and Norway, but they are selling the gold. Like they're definitely, pushing this agenda and trying to suppress prices. Meanwhile, you have record highs in gold in Australia. So clearly, an interest rate cut here, what is significant here is that there actually is the first one of the major nations to cut an interest rate.
Well, John, look at all these other countries, as I mentioned, raising these interest rates up. When you look at their historical records, what happens in a financial crisis is that, they dipped down pretty bad. And I believe it was between 5 and 5.5% between 2008 and 2012 in the United States after the financial crisis. And if they went down even at the exact same amount today, but of course it's going to be more so, obviously, they'd be in negative interest rate territory. The interest rates in the United States have not been pushed up enough. And never mind any of this, the insanity of thinking that trying this over and over again is going to make a difference. It's just centralization of the economy, and maybe we can fix it with more centralization. Oh, more problems, more centralization. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, they're desperate. They want to, push up their economy and try to get more people indebted, which is, the whole real estate bubble has collapsed several places around Australia. We reported on Sydney, Melbourne, and a whole bunch of other.
We've been reporting on that for years, and people called us crazy, and then we saw it's just in a tailspin. And some people say, well, it's normal. It's what we're going to expect in a volatile market. And it's like, well, did you expect the prices to go up at the rate that they did for so long and just go up forever? Obviously not. This is a huge collision course they're on.
Yeah, no, it's totally unsustainable. I recently did a presentation on the cashless future because that's where we're moving towards here. If they're going to actually be able to push down to try to stimulate the economy, they're going to have to go into negative territory. They're going to have to, if they go, let's say 5% down from where they are now, well, the cash rate is going to be negative 4.25. which is actually not too far away from In the Curse of Cash by Kenneth Rogoff. He was talking about 5% negative.
Well, that brings me to the next point, John, because this is a really important point to work off of. The whole point that they're going to go negative is that they're going to go into a cashless society. And the cashless society we're talking about, the centrally planned cashless society, they've already been, unrolling the test ground for this in Australia, very much so. Facial recognition passports, that's voluntary for now, but I mean, that's for now. And I've seen in other places other than Australia, but Australia has been really pushing to be as cashless as possible. We've reported for years on their attempt to demonetize many different fractions of money because they say money laundering. People might hide money from the government because, we need the government, the crime racket, to steal everyone's money safely, fair and square, and then track everyone. As I've said before, if your money's in the bank, it's not yours, it's the bank's. And if your money's always going through the banks via digital transaction, legal tender laws, etc., it's not your money, it's always the bank's, and you are essentially owned by the banking system, by fiat, by law, legal tender laws. So we're seeing that in many places around the world. We saw it in Sweden. They went negative. Japan has gone negative.
Switzerland and Denmark. So in Switzerland, they went negative, but the problem was everybody was storing their money in the vaults because they didn't want to have them in the banks because they have to pay money. This is the insanity of a negative interest rate, Josh, is to actually, you give your money to the bank, you actually lend it to the bank, and then they charge you for having it there. Meanwhile, they're using that money to spend, to go out and invest in stocks, derivatives, all this garbage, and then they're going to lose it.
And meanwhile, the depositor insurance is so minuscule and in some cases almost non-existent that, there's no safety at all for your money to be. You might as well keep your worthless fiat under your blankets.
Yeah, so that brings me to, you should check out my report on the Australian economy because I go in detail on that, but I just want to mention what it says about the, they have something, don't have the CDIC, they have something called the Financial Claims Scheme, but they have...
Scheme?
Yes. Scam. Anyways, but it's the number is $20 billion per bank they're going to give the government. Well, do you know how much money is in NAB or any of the major banks? Usually between 600 to 900 billion. So how is that 20 billion is going to, make sure that the savers are fine? It's like total, it's a complete joke.
Well, it's like when people say that the German economy, that the German government will bail out Deutsche Bank when their derivative exposure is like 50 times the size of the GDP of Germany.
Well, this is the thing, Josh. Who's going to bail out Germany? Well, they bailed out the southern states, right? Like Spain, Italy, all those. But that was Deutsche Bank and Societe Generale, the two major banks, was the ones that actually they used to bail out. Well, who's going to bail out the banks that are bailing out everybody? It's like nobody.
So that leads me finally to the fact that we all need to be protecting ourselves because we've seen over the last several years in Australia that it's been that incremental frog boil to complete collectivism that we talk about so much, that they've slowly been normalizing the use of, under the guise of convenience, the use of complete technocratic surveillance, control of the populace, and they'll say, well, it's for the greater good of the greater number. We need you all under this system, this one blanket, and we will take care of you. Don't worry, be completely dependent on this system because we got your back, when really it only benefits to enslave you, to own you, to control you. That's the whole notion of the banks, the debt of the banks and the governments working side by side, because a populace in debt is a populace in servitude. So what do you expect is going to happen when everyone's completely in debt and the government says, don't worry, we got you on this? It's very, very dangerous. We're walking down a very slippery slope, and we have to remember that it comes down to us as individuals saving ourselves and not asking the government to fix this, because they don't benefit out of fixing things. The government doesn't do anything they personally benefit from. They only benefit from the control of the masses and the further and further control of the masses, and this guise under of like, we're here to be friendly and helpful to you, when really the whole method is that they can slowly enforce more restrictions on your free will, completely destroy your wealth, and it pushes you down that bottomless pit of debt where you're forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system. That's perfect servitude, and that's right where they're putting you right now. So ensuring your wealth is incredibly important. I mean, this isn't investment advice. This is our opinion, of course, but we've talked about it for years, John. I mean, things like gold and silver, to ensure wealth, not as an investment. It's not even supposed to be an investment. It's about being able to protect protect your gold and protect your wealth against the dollar crashes. And there's so many other ways to protect your wealth, John.
Yeah, it is a store of value, and you gotta have to get off that bankster grid, as we call it here. You gotta get away from keeping your money in banks, because it's gonna be. I had a long conversation with several people here at the Red Pill Expo about this, and I believe that the biggest risk is gonna be probably having your money in the bank. That's what we're gonna see what's coming, because if you think that they are not ready with a cashless system, look at what we reported on that nobody has reported on the mainstream media. Project Jasper and Project Uniper out of Singapore, the two big blockchain transactions that just happened as the first between two central banks through the whole banking system. So they have actually done a transaction that money moves through the whole banking system, and it's happening. If you think that they're not ready for things happening, you are in for a surprise. And if you think that it's we're just gonna stay safe in either you call it credit unions or other things, you're even in worse trouble. I did the numbers in Canada. Credit unions are garbage in Canada, to be honest with you. Actually, Manitoban ones was the worst. That nearly has nothing cash to cover the deposits.
Wait, are you saying that complete strangers in suits that you've never met before aren't safe with all of your money with absolutely no reason to give it back, because you're basically loaning it to them with a very small promise of insurance?
Well, they have a terrible historical track record of banksters. Yeah. If you pick up a couple of history books over just that last 100 years, they really have a terrible track record.
Well, I mean, John, throughout all of history, print out more IOUs than they have money, and I mean, it's a communist entity by its very being, by the fractional reserve lending that they do for the government. That's straight out of the planks of communism. So a lot of people don't realize it when they're dealing with banks. They're dealing with an entity that is a quasi-private, quasi-government, because they are enforcing that debt down people's throats. People end up paying off the interest on the debt, and of course no one is planning to pay off a debt when they're only paying the interest on the debt. I think we could safely say that. But with that said, obviously there's cryptocurrencies as well that are fundamentally valuable, decentralized, useful, a few out of the many, but you have to do your own due diligence and try to understand that concept, because I know it's a bit too much, and obviously there needs to be better education on the subject matter, and we try to do our best as much as possible. But I mean, it is a tricky thing for a lot of people to understand and to discern between obviously the centrally planned cashless system by fiat, by law, by the use of force, and then the decentralized cryptocurrency technologies, blockchain infrastructure technologies that are meant in order for us to be able to create our own infrastructure outside of the government, outside of the banks. Doesn't mean that it's 100% safe always, but it also means that it's not controlled by that entity, and we need to try and do a better job of explaining that, because most people that I talk to still, it's like, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy, and how do you know it's different from the cashless society that the government's putting together? So we got to do some more videos on that. We've done a few on that, but I think it's important for people to understand the difference, because you could use, for example, I often make the point with the blockchain technology. For example, you can take food that sustains your life and food that's been poisoned. You don't blame all food that sustains your life for the food that poisons you. Things can be used for good, things can be used for evil. Something like the blockchain, it's like you could take a gun and slaughter a whole bunch of innocent people, but save all of those people with that gun as well on the other side of things. So blockchain technology can be used, if centralized, to enslave humanity, just like it can be used to overthrow that which enslaves humanity if it's properly decentralized and actually has use case, scarcity, all the things that bring subjective value. So anyway, we're going to wrap this up here at the old Hartford Whalers Stadium, the XL Center here in Hartford, Connecticut. An interesting place to shoot a video. I could not resist. And we'll be back at you with a lot more. But first, John, as we close this off, can you give a bottom line for everyone that's watching?
Yeah, well, the bottom line, let's go back to what we started talking about, the interest rate cut. The reason why they're cutting is because they need more people to get into debt to prop up the system, because they're totally have debt saturated the whole economy, and there's nobody else left to borrow to, because everybody can't pay their debt anymore. And that's what happens. Every single system that's out there, that's fiat, that's debt-based, have gone through that cycle where it's a slow incremental run towards that place where you have what we've said many times, debt saturation, and that is what's going to kill the economy. So people need to understand that this is just another little band-aid on a gushing wound, and it's not going to fix anything anything, it's gonna go really fast downhill for the Australian economy. I thought Canada was going to be the first because the distance between a 1 month and a 30-year in Canada is only like between 14 to 8 basis points, which is like nothing. That's 0.08%.
And Canada sold off all its gold years ago.
Yeah, so I thought Canada was going to be the first of the cut. I had a bet with some friends that are watching us here, so they'll have a fun, making fun of us for losing that bet. But yeah, anyways,
race to the bottom.
Yeah, which is terrible. It's a terrible bet to actually have. But yeah, just prepare yourself, guys, and get out of the banking system. That's just a historical opinion that tells us that being in banks over time, there is massive risk for you losing your money, and you just got to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So think for yourself, rule yourself, start being a responsible human being. Don't look for others to save you. You are the change you wish to see in the world. So stop looking elsewhere. You can change all of these problems and actually bring upon your own solutions and make this a much better world for you and your children. But anyway, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so heavily demonetized and censored by YouTube as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. The shadow banning is getting really bad, guys. Also, check our Bitcoin address right here on the screen or in the description below. We really appreciate it. And of course, check us out at the Red Pill Expo 2019. Of course, the great G. Edward Griffin and so many other incredible speakers will be there. Our link for that is below as well. And we cannot forget Mike Maloney's goldsilver.com, which you can also find in the description. One of the greatest market and monetary historians out there. We really encourage everyone to check that out. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.